What if the thing you've been trying to fix was never broken? Stop for a moment. Let that land. You've spent years on this. Thousands of dollars. Countless sleepless nights staring at ceilings, wondering what's wrong with you. You've done the therapy, filled the journals, repeated the affirmations until they lost all meaning. You've attended the retreats, downloaded the apps, hired the coaches, and you're still here. Still searching, still feeling like something fundamental is missing. Here's what nobody in the self-help industry wants you to know. They need you to feel broken. $13.2 billion per year depends on your sense of inadequacy. Every book, every course, every guru builds their empire on a single foundation: the belief that you are not enough as you are. What if that feeling was installed? What if you've been solving a problem that doesn't actually exist? Think about it. Every hour spent fixing yourself is an hour stolen. Stolen from building something meaningful. Stolen from creating, from loving fully, from actually living your life. You could die still trying to become ready, still waiting to be healed enough to finally begin. How many years have already vanished this way? Here's what we're going to explore together. Why do the most worked on people often feel the most stuck? What did ancient philosophers understand that modern self-help has completely forgotten? And what happens when you stop trying to fix yourself and start redirecting your attention instead? This audiobook will not heal you, because you don't need healing. What you need is your attention back. By the time we reach the final words, you'll understand why your so-called flaws were actually features all along, and you'll see clearly that distraction, not damage, has been the real enemy this entire time. Let's begin with a story. Marcus sat in his car in the parking garage for 45 minutes after his therapy session. The engine was off. His hands rested on the steering wheel. He wasn't crying. He wasn't angry. He was just tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. 12 years. That's how long he'd been working on himself. It started after his divorce, when a well-meaning friend handed him a book about codependency. That book led to another, then a workshop, then therapy, then a men's group, then a meditation retreat, then a different kind of therapy, then coaching, then more books, then podcasts, then online courses. 12 years of excavating his childhood, analyzing his attachment style, identifying his limiting beliefs, processing his trauma, healing his inner child, integrating his shadow, rewiring his nervous system. And sitting there in that parking garage, Marcus realized something that made his stomach drop. He didn't feel any more whole than he did 12 years ago. If anything, he felt more fragmented, more convinced of his brokenness, more certain that the real healing was always one more technique away, one more breakthrough away, one more modality away. "What have I been doing all this time?" he whispered to no one. Marcus isn't alone. There are millions of people just like him, intelligent, sincere, genuinely committed to growth. People who've done the work, people who keep doing the work, and people who've slowly, insidiously, come to organize their entire identity around the project of self-improvement. They don't realize they've fallen into a trap that looks like progress, a trap that feels productive, a trap that their therapists and coaches and favorite authors rarely mention, because their livelihoods depend on the trap existing. The trap is this: you cannot fix your way to wholeness, because the premise that you need fixing is itself the source of the suffering. This isn't about dismissing genuine mental health challenges. It isn't about toxic positivity or spiritual bypassing. It isn't about pretending that trauma doesn't exist or that therapeutic work has no value. Those things are real and important. But there's a difference between addressing specific wounds and living as though your fundamental self is defective. There's a difference between healing from something that happened to you and believing you are inherently damaged goods. There's a difference between growing as a human being and treating your existence as a problem to be solved. Most people in the self-improvement world have confused these things. They've taken the reasonable idea that humans can develop and learn and change, and they've twisted it into something much darker. The belief that they are not acceptable as they currently are. The belief that they must earn their okayness through perpetual work on themselves. The belief that wholeness is a destination they'll reach someday if they just try hard enough. Here's the radical truth we're going to explore throughout this audiobook. You were whole the moment you were born. Everything you've done since then, every belief you've adopted about your brokenness, every self-improvement project you've undertaken has been a form of forgetting. Not progress toward wholeness, but distance from the wholeness that was always there. You aren't broken, you're distracted. And those are very, very different problems requiring very different solutions. Think about what happens when you believe you're broken. You spend enormous amounts of energy trying to locate the damage. You analyze yourself constantly. You interpret every difficult emotion as evidence of your dysfunction. You compare your insides to other people's outsides and always find yourself lacking. You postpone fully engaging with life until you've fixed enough of yourself to deserve it. Now, think about what happens when you recognize you're distracted. Suddenly, the task isn't excavation and repair. It's redirection. It's gathering your scattered attention and pointing it somewhere useful. It's recognizing that the constant self-analysis is itself the problem, not the solution. It's understanding that you don't need more insight into your patterns. You need to stop being so fascinated by them. The difference is everything. Let me tell you about the first time I really understood this distinction. I was at a meditation retreat, the kind where you sit in silence for hours and watch your own mind. I'd been practicing meditation for years at that point, always with the goal of becoming calmer, more centered, more enlightened. I was using meditation as another self-improvement tool, another way to fix the problem of being me. On the third day of the retreat, something shifted. I was sitting there watching my thoughts, and I noticed something I'd never noticed before. Every single thought was about me. My problems, my past, my future, my personality, my trauma, my growth, my enlightenment, my. It was exhausting. And more than that, it was incredibly boring. I'd spent years thinking about myself as though I was the most fascinating subject in the universe, as though the archaeology of my psyche was the most important work I could be doing. And suddenly I saw it for what it was. Distraction. Pure distraction. All that energy I'd poured into understanding myself and fixing myself and optimizing myself was energy I hadn't poured into anything else. Every hour spent journaling about my childhood wounds was an hour I hadn't spent being present with the people I love. Every dollar spent on the latest self-help program was a dollar I hadn't invested in building something meaningful. Every conversation where I'd steered things back to my personal growth journey was a connection I'd failed to actually make. I wasn't broken and working on healing. I was whole and completely distracted from that wholeness by the project of self-improvement. When I left that retreat, I made a decision. I was going to stop treating myself as a problem to be solved. I was going to stop assuming that difficult emotions meant something was wrong with me. I was going to stop excavating my past and start actually living my present. It wasn't easy. The habit of self-analysis doesn't die quietly, but slowly something remarkable happened. The less I focused on fixing myself, the more okay I actually felt. The less I analyzed my patterns, the less power they seemed to have. The less I identified as someone on a healing journey, the more healed I actually became. Not because I'd finally succeeded at self-improvement, but because I'd stopped trying. This is the paradox at the heart of this audiobook. The way out of suffering isn't to suffer more intentionally. The way to wholeness isn't to spend more time thinking about why you're not whole. The path to peace isn't paved with more self-analysis and more insight and more processing. The path to peace is paved with attention. Attention redirected away from the endless project of self and toward something, anything else. We're going to explore this idea from many angles in the chapters ahead. We'll look at how the modern self-help industry profits from your sense of inadequacy. We'll examine how distraction disguises itself as genuine psychological damage. We'll understand the economy of attention and how you've been spending yours on the wrong things. We'll also get practical. You'll learn to distinguish between real wounds that need care and manufactured problems that just need to be ignored. You'll discover how to redirect your natural traits instead of fighting against them. You'll develop early warning systems for when you start slipping back into fixing mode. But first, we need to go deeper into the myth that started it all. The myth of the broken self. Somewhere along the way, you learned that something was fundamentally wrong with you. Can you remember the first time? Can you recall the moment when the idea of your own defectiveness was first planted? For some people, it's obvious. A parent who constantly criticized. A teacher who said you'd never amount to anything. A religion that insisted you were born sinful and needed to be saved. An early experience of failure that you never quite recovered from. For others, it's more subtle. There was no single moment, just a gradual accumulation of messages. Advertisements telling you that you need to be thinner, fitter, more successful, more attractive. Social media showing you everyone else's highlight reels while you sat alone with your raw footage. A culture that celebrates constant improvement and treats contentment as complacency. Either way, the message got through. Something is wrong with you. You need to be fixed. But here's what I want you to consider. That message was never true. It was never an accurate assessment of reality. It was always an interpretation, a story, a belief that got installed without your conscious consent. Think about a newborn baby. Is there anything wrong with that baby? Is the baby broken? Does the baby need to go on a healing journey before it's acceptable? Of course not. The baby is complete, whole, perfect, not in the sense of having no room for development, but in the sense of being exactly what it is without any need for justification or improvement. You were that baby once. What happened? What happened is that you learned to see yourself through other people's eyes. You internalized their judgments, their preferences, their fears. You adopted beliefs about yourself that originated in someone else's mind. You started measuring yourself against standards that you never consciously chose. And somewhere in that process, You forgot something essential. You forgot that underneath all the conditioning, all the learned self-criticism, all the accumulated beliefs about your inadequacy, there's something that was never touched by any of it. Something whole, something that doesn't need fixing because it was never broken in the first place. The spiritual traditions call it different things. The true self, Buddha nature, the soul, the divine spark, the witness. But the name doesn't matter. What matters is the recognition that there's a dimension of your being that exists prior to all your stories about yourself, and that dimension is perfectly, eternally okay. This isn't a comforting fantasy. It's actually a verifiable experience. Have you ever had a moment, even just a brief flash, where the inner critic went completely quiet? A moment where you weren't judging yourself, weren't comparing yourself, weren't strategizing about how to improve yourself. Maybe it happened in nature, or while absorbed in creative work, or in the presence of someone you love, or for no reason at all. In that moment, did you feel broken? Did you feel like there was something fundamentally wrong with you that needed to be fixed? I'm guessing you didn't. I'm guessing that in those rare moments of genuine presence, the whole self-improvement project seemed completely irrelevant. Because when you're actually here, actually inhabiting your experience fully, there's no one standing outside of yourself, evaluating whether you're good enough. That's not a special state you have to achieve. That's actually what you are when you're not distracted by thoughts about who you are. The myth of the broken self is just that, a myth, a story, a collective hallucination that we've all bought into because everyone around us bought into it first. It's not reality. It's a lens through which we've been taught to interpret reality, and lenses can be changed. Now, I want to be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you haven't experienced pain. I'm not saying that bad things haven't happened to you. I'm not saying that you don't have patterns of thought and behavior that cause you suffering. What I'm saying is that none of those things mean you're broken. Pain is not brokenness. Pain is just pain. It's part of being alive. Every human being experiences pain, loss, disappointment, fear. That doesn't make us defective. It makes us human. Trauma is not brokenness either. Trauma is what happens when painful experiences overwhelm our capacity to process them in the moment. The effects of trauma are real and can be significant. But the person underneath the trauma isn't damaged goods. They're a whole person who experienced something overwhelming. Those are different things. Even the patterns you struggle with, the anxiety, the depression, the addictive tendencies, the relationship difficulties, these aren't evidence of your fundamental brokenness. They're evidence that you're a human being navigating a complicated world with a nervous system that evolved for very different conditions. They're challenges, not character defects. They're situations, not sentences. The shift I'm asking you to make isn't about denying your struggles. It's about changing the context in which you hold them. Instead of seeing your challenges as proof that something is wrong with you at your core, see them as experiences you're having. Instead of identifying as a broken person in need of repair, identify as a whole person who sometimes struggles. The difference might seem subtle, but it changes everything. When you believe you're broken, your struggles become evidence for the prosecution. Every time you feel anxious, you think, "See, I knew something was wrong with me." Every time you make a mistake, you think, "Here's more proof of my defectiveness." The challenges become part of your identity, woven into the story of who you are. When you recognize you're whole, your struggles become just experiences passing through. The anxiety arises and you think, here's some anxiety. The mistake happens and you think, that didn't go well. Nothing is added to your identity. Nothing is accumulated as evidence of your brokenness. It's just weather, not climate. This reframe doesn't make the struggles disappear. What it does is stop them from compounding. Because here's what most people don't realize. A significant portion of their suffering doesn't come from the original challenge. It comes from the meaning they make of it. It comes from the self-judgment and self-criticism and existential conclusions they draw from having the challenge in the first place. Take anxiety as an example. The raw sensation of anxiety, the racing heart, the tight chest, the worried thoughts, is uncomfortable but manageable. What makes it unbearable is the secondary layer, the anxiety about the anxiety, the belief that feeling this way means something is wrong with you, the shame about still struggling with this after all the work you've done, the fear that you'll never get better, that this is just who you are. That secondary layer often causes more suffering than the original anxiety ever did. And that secondary layer is entirely optional. It only exists because you believe the myth of the broken self. When you stop believing that myth, something magical happens. The original challenges don't necessarily disappear, but the secondary suffering does. You can feel anxious without feeling anxious about feeling anxious. You can make mistakes without concluding that you're fundamentally flawed. You can struggle without turning the struggle into an identity. This is what's available on the other side of the myth. Not a perfect life with no challenges, but a much, much simpler relationship with the challenges you have. Let me tell you about Rebecca. When she first came to see me, she had a list. Not a physical list, but a mental inventory of everything that was wrong with her that she'd assembled over years of therapy and self-help work. She rattled it off like she was reading from a medical chart. I have an anxious attachment style, she said. I'm codependent. I have abandonment wounds from my childhood. I struggle with perfectionism. I have imposter syndrome. I'm probably on the autism spectrum. I might have ADHD. I definitely have trauma. I'm an empath, which means I absorb other people's emotions. And I have a harsh inner critic that I've been trying to heal for years. She paused and looked at me. That's why I'm here, she said. I need help fixing all of this. I asked her a question. Who were you before you learned all those words? She looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, before you knew what anxious attachment was, before you'd ever heard the term codependent, before anyone told you that you had abandonment wounds or imposter syndrome or a harsh inner critic. Who were you then? She was quiet for a long time. I was just Rebecca, she finally said. I was just a person who sometimes felt scared, and sometimes felt sad, and sometimes felt like I didn't belong. But I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. I just thought that was life. And now? Now I know better, she said. Now I understand all the ways I'm damaged. Do you? I asked. Or have you just accumulated a lot of labels? Rebecca's story is incredibly common. She'd entered the self-help world, hoping to feel better about herself. Instead, she'd collected an ever-growing list of diagnoses and pathologies and wounds that needed healing. Every book she read added to the list. Every workshop revealed another flaw she hadn't known about. Every therapist introduced her to new vocabulary for her dysfunction. She'd spent a decade becoming an expert on her own brokenness, and all that expertise hadn't made her feel less broken. It had made her feel more broken, because now she didn't just have problems. She had problems that had names and histories and complex etiologies. She didn't just feel sad sometimes. She had abandonment wounds manifesting as anxious attachment. The labels had given her the illusion of understanding, but they hadn't given her peace. If anything, they'd made peace impossible because they'd convinced her that peace was inappropriate until all the damage was repaired. Here's what I want you to consider. What if the labels are making things worse? What if all that sophisticated vocabulary for your dysfunction is actually keeping you stuck? What if the detailed maps of your psyche have become a labyrinth you can't escape? What if knowing so much about what's wrong with you has made it harder, not easier, to feel okay? I'm not anti-psychology. I'm not against understanding yourself. But I've noticed something in my years of working with people. The ones who are most fluent in the language of pathology are often the least at peace with themselves. The ones who can explain their patterns in exquisite detail are often the most stuck in those patterns. It's as though the understanding has become a substitute for actual change, as though the ability to name the wound has become more important than actually healing it, as though the map of the territory has become so interesting that no one bothers to walk the actual terrain. What if you put down all the labels for a while? What if you forgot everything you've learned about attachment styles and trauma, responses, and personality disorders? What if you went back to being just a person who sometimes feels scared, and sometimes feels sad, and sometimes feels like they don't belong? Would that really be worse? Or might it actually be an enormous relief? Let's talk about how distraction disguises itself as damage, because this is the sleight of hand that keeps the whole self-improvement industry running. This is the trick that keeps you coming back for more. This is the illusion that needs to be seen through before anything can really change. Here's what I've observed over many years of working with people who are committed to personal growth. Many of them, possibly most of them, don't actually have deep psychological wounds that require extensive healing work. What they have is scattered attention and the habit of self-analysis. And those two things create an experience that feels like brokenness, but isn't. Let me explain what I mean. When your attention is fragmented, when you're constantly jumping from one thought to the next, one worry to the next, one notification to the next, you never settle into the direct experience of being yourself. You never land in the present moment long enough to feel the inherent okayness of being alive. Instead, you're always somewhere else, thinking about the past, worrying about the future, comparing yourself to others, planning your next move. In this fragmented state, you feel unsettled, anxious, like something is wrong, like something needs to be fixed. But that feeling isn't coming from actual damage. It's coming from the simple fact that you're not present. You're not here. Your attention is scattered across 1,000 different concerns, none of which you're fully experiencing. Then, along comes the self-help industry with an explanation. You feel unsettled because you have anxiety. You have anxiety because you have trauma. You have trauma because of what happened in your childhood. Your childhood was that way because your parents had their own unresolved issues. And on, an endless chain of cause and effect that leads back through generations. It's a compelling story. It explains the feeling. It gives you something to work on. It turns your unsettledness into a project with specific steps and measurable progress. The only problem is that it's often wrong. The feeling of unsettledness doesn't necessarily come from past trauma. It often comes from present distraction. You don't feel anxious because something bad happened to you years ago. You feel anxious because right now, in this moment, your attention is fragmented and you're not actually here. But nobody makes money from telling you to just settle into the present moment. There's no empire to build from that advice, so instead, they give you something much more complicated. A diagnosis, a healing journey, a 10-step program, an endless project of self-improvement that will keep you engaged and paying for years. And here's the cruel irony. All that self-improvement work often makes the distraction worse. Because what is self-analysis if not another thing to think about? What is processing your trauma if not another way to be somewhere other than here? What is working on yourself if not the ultimate distraction from actually being yourself? I've met people who've spent decades in therapy, who are more in their heads than ever. I've met people who've done every healing modality imaginable, who are less present than people who've never heard of inner work. I've met people who are absolute experts on their own psyches, who have never, not once, experienced a moment of genuine peace. They're not failing at self-improvement. They're succeeding at it. The problem is that success at self-improvement isn't the same as peace. Often it's the opposite. The more you improve yourself, the more you reinforce the idea that you need improving. The more you fix yourself, the more you confirm that you're broken. So, what's the alternative? The alternative is to recognize distraction for what it is and address it directly. Not through more self-analysis, but through the simple practice of gathering your attention and placing it somewhere useful. Not through understanding why you're distracted, but through the actual act of coming back to the present moment. This might sound too simple. If you've spent years doing deep psychological work, the idea that you just need to be more present might seem laughably naive. How can mere attention solve complex trauma? How can simply being here address decades of conditioning? But here's what I've found. Presence doesn't need to solve those things, because in most cases, those things aren't the real problem. The real problem is that you're never here long enough to notice that right now, in this moment, nothing is actually wrong. You're so busy analyzing what happened yesterday and worrying about what might happen tomorrow that you never give yourself a chance to experience the okayness of today. And when you do experience that okayness, something remarkable happens. All those psychological issues you've been working on suddenly seem much less significant. Not because you've healed them, but because you're no longer looking at them through the magnifying glass of constant self-analysis. They're just part of the landscape, not the whole terrain. Let me give you a concrete example of what I'm talking about. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a beautiful lake. The sun is setting, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. The water is still. Birds are singing. It's objectively a beautiful moment. Now imagine that while standing there, you're completely lost in thought. You're thinking about a difficult conversation you had earlier. You're worrying about a project at work. You're analyzing why you always seem to feel so anxious. You're wondering if you'll ever feel truly at peace. What's your experience of that moment? It's not the beautiful sunset. It's the worry, the analysis, the endless thinking. You're standing in paradise, but you're experiencing hell. Not because anything is wrong with you, but because your attention is somewhere else. Now imagine the same scene, but this time you're actually present. You see the colors, you feel the breeze, you hear the birds. You're fully here, not thinking about anything else, just experiencing what's happening right now. What's your experience? It's exactly what it appears to be. Beauty, peace, simplicity. No analysis required, no fixing needed. Just this. The difference between those two experiences has nothing to do with your psychological health. It has nothing to do with whether you've healed your childhood wounds or integrated your shadow or rewired your attachment style. It has everything to do with where your attention is. In the first scenario, your attention is fragmented, caught up in the endless activity of the thinking mind. In the second scenario, your attention is gathered, placed on what's actually happening. Same person, same lake, same sunset. Completely different experience. This is what I mean when I say you're not broken, you're distracted. The suffering isn't coming from damage deep in your psyche. It's coming from the simple fact that you're not here. And the solution isn't years of excavation and repair. It's the much simpler, though admittedly not easy, practice of gathering your attention and coming back. Now, I can already hear the objections. But what about real trauma? What about genuine mental health conditions? What about people who have actual neurological differences that affect how they process experience? Those things are real. I'm not dismissing them, but I'm also not talking about them. I'm talking about the millions of people who have been convinced they have deep psychological damage when what they actually have is a distracted mind and a culture that pathologizes normal human experience. I'm talking about the person who feels anxious in social situations and has been told they have social anxiety disorder, when really they just haven't developed the skill of being present with others. I'm talking about the person who feels sad sometimes and has been told they have depression, when really they're just lonely and disconnected in a society that's increasingly isolating. I'm talking about the person who struggles to focus and has been told they have ADHD, when really their attention has been shattered by years of smartphone use and constant stimulation. These things might look like psychological disorders. They might feel like psychological disorders. The self-help industry and even the mental health industry might diagnose them as psychological disorders. But very often, they're not. They're symptoms of distraction. They're what happens when human beings live in ways that fragment their attention and then interpret that fragmentation as personal dysfunction. The proof is in what actually helps. If someone's struggling with anxiety, what's more effective in most cases? Years of processing childhood memories or 10 minutes of slow, conscious breathing? If someone's dealing with depression, what creates more genuine change? Analyzing the roots of their unhappiness or actually connecting with another human being? If someone can't focus, what's more powerful? Medication that forces their brain to pay attention or removing the sources of distraction and rebuilding their capacity for sustained presence? I'm not against medication. I'm not against therapy. I'm not against any of the tools we've developed for helping people who are struggling. But I am against the default assumption that when someone is suffering, the cause must be deep psychological damage that requires extensive repair. Sometimes it's just distraction. Sometimes the suffering is entirely a product of where attention is being placed. And sometimes the solution is not more work on yourself, but less. Not more analysis, but less. Not more going inward, but more coming out and being here. This is the invitation of this audiobook, not to dismiss your struggles, not to pretend everything is fine, but to question the assumption that your struggles indicate something fundamentally wrong with you, to consider the possibility that you've been solving the wrong problem, to explore what happens when you stop trying to fix yourself and start simply redirecting your attention. Let's talk about the attention economy of your inner world, because what I'm about to describe might be the most important thing you take from this entire audiobook. You're familiar with the concept of the attention economy in the external world. Companies compete for your attention because attention is valuable. It can be monetized. Your eyeballs on their content equal money in their pockets. This is why social media platforms are designed to be addictive, why notifications constantly interrupt you, why everything is optimized for engagement. What's less discussed is that your inner world operates on the same principle. Your mental energy is a finite resource. You only have so much attention available on any given day. And that attention is constantly being competed for by different internal forces. Your fears want your attention. They present worst-case scenarios and demand that you engage with them. Your regrets want your attention. They replay past mistakes and insist you keep analyzing them. Your desires want your attention. They promise future happiness if you'll just focus on pursuing them. Your self-criticism wants your attention. It offers detailed assessments of your failures and inadequacies. And here's the thing. You've probably been giving most of your attention to the last one. Your self-criticism. Your internal project of self-improvement. Your endless analysis of what's wrong with you and how to fix it. This means that a huge portion of your mental energy, your most precious resource, has been flowing toward one destination, the contemplation of your own defectiveness. Think about what that means. Think about the opportunity cost. Every minute spent criticizing yourself is a minute not spent creating something. Every hour devoted to analyzing your patterns is an hour not devoted to breaking them through action. Every day focused on becoming a better version of yourself is a day not spent. Being the version of yourself that already exists. You've been spending your attention currency on the most expensive item in the store, your own inadequacy. And you've been doing it for years, maybe decades, accumulating a massive debt of unlived life. What if you reallocated that attention? What if you took even half of the mental energy you've been spending on self-improvement and spent it on literally anything else? What would become possible? Here's an exercise I want you to try. For one day, just one day, notice every time your attention goes to self-criticism or self-analysis. Don't try to stop it. Just notice it. Keep a mental tally. Or if you want to be more rigorous, make a mark on paper every time you catch yourself thinking about what's wrong with you. Most people who do this exercise are shocked by the results. They had no idea how much of their mental bandwidth was being consumed by self-focused negativity. They couldn't believe how many hours of the day were spent in some form of self-evaluation. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, you start to get angry. Because you realize how much has been stolen from you. Not by some external oppressor, but by an internal habit that you didn't even know was running. The habit of self-analysis feels productive. That's what makes it so insidious. When you're thinking about your patterns, it feels like you're doing something useful. When you're processing your emotions, it feels like important work. When you're planning your next growth initiative, it feels like progress. But it's not progress. It's just thinking. It's just the mind churning away at its favorite subject, itself. Real progress doesn't happen in your head. It happens in the world. Real growth doesn't come from understanding your patterns. It comes from doing things differently. Real change isn't a product of analysis. It's a product of action. And action requires attention. The very attention that you've been squandering on the endless project of self. I want you to consider the possibility that you've been thinking about yourself way too much. I know that's a strange thing to say in a culture that emphasizes self-awareness and self-knowledge. But there's a difference between healthy self-reflection and obsessive self-focus. And most people who are into personal growth have crossed that line without realizing it. Healthy self-reflection is brief and purposeful. You notice something, you consider it, you make any necessary adjustments, and you move on. Total time investment, maybe a few minutes. Then your attention goes back to living your life, engaging with the world, being present with what's happening. Obsessive self-focus is extended and recursive. You notice something, and that triggers a chain of analysis. Why am I like this? What does this mean about me? How does this connect to my childhood? What can I do to fix it? Is this making progress or not? And before you know it, hours have passed, and you're still spinning in the same mental loop, no closer to resolution than when you started. If you're honest with yourself, which one describes your typical relationship with self-reflection? The shift I'm inviting is not to stop reflecting entirely. It's to impose limits. It's to recognize self-reflection as a tool that's useful in small doses and toxic in large ones. It's to treat time spent thinking about yourself the same way you'd treat time spent on any potentially addictive activity. With awareness, with boundaries, with the understanding that more is not always better. What might those limits look like? Here's one possibility. Give yourself 10 minutes per day for self-reflection. Set a timer. During those 10 minutes, you can analyze yourself to your heart's content. You can process emotions, examine patterns, plan personal growth initiatives. Go wild. But when the timer goes off, you're done. Whatever you were thinking about, you let it go. You redirect your attention to something else. Something in the world rather than in your head. Something that involves action rather than just contemplation. 10 minutes might seem absurdly short if you're used to spending hours in self-analysis. But that's exactly the point. You've been overdosing on self-focus. The withdrawal might be uncomfortable at first. You might find yourself reflexively returning to the familiar territory of your own psyche. But with practice, you'll discover something amazing. Life gets better when you think about yourself less, not because you've solved all your problems, not because you've finally achieved the insight that fixes everything, but simply because you're no longer wasting your precious attention on something that doesn't deserve it. Your problems don't actually need that much attention. Most of them will sort themselves out if you just leave them alone and focus on living well. The ones that won't sort themselves out need action, not analysis. And you can't take action if all your energy is going to thinking. This is the inner attention economy. You have limited resources. You've been spending them on self-criticism and self-improvement. The return on that investment has been poor. It's time to reallocate. Now let's go deeper into the archaeology of your so-called flaws. Because here's something that might surprise you. Most of the things you've been trying to fix about yourself aren't actually problems. They're adaptive responses that served you at some point. They're features that got mislabeled as bugs. They're strengths that are pointed in the wrong direction. Take anxiety, for example. Anxiety is uncomfortable. It limits your life. It makes you avoid things you probably shouldn't avoid. It's completely reasonable to want less of it. But have you ever considered why you developed anxiety in the first place? In most cases, anxiety emerges as a protective response. Something in your environment was threatening or unpredictable. Your nervous system learned to be on high alert. It was keeping you safe. The problem is that the anxiety didn't turn off when the threat passed. It became a habit, a default setting that continues running even when it's no longer needed. You're not broken. You have a very effective alarm system that's stuck in the on position. Seen this way, the task isn't to fix your anxiety as though it's a defect. The task is to update your nervous system's assessment of danger, to help it recognize that the threat has passed, to redirect that protective energy toward situations where vigilance is actually useful. The same principle applies to almost any trait you might consider a flaw. Are you overly controlling? That's probably because at some point, control was the only way to feel safe in a chaotic environment. Are you people-pleasing? That emerged because your survival depended on keeping certain people happy. Are you emotionally avoidant? That was a strategy for managing feelings that would have been overwhelming to a younger version of you. None of these things indicate that something is fundamentally wrong with you. They indicate that you adapted, you survived, you developed strategies that worked in the context you were in. The fact that those strategies are now causing problems doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're still running old software in a new environment. The upgrade doesn't require fixing. It requires redirecting, taking the same underlying capacity and pointing it somewhere more useful. If you're controlling, you have a strong ability to organize and manage. That's valuable. The question isn't how to eliminate it, but how to apply it to things that actually benefit from being controlled, like your own schedule or your creative projects, rather than other people. If you're people-pleasing, you have highly developed sensitivity to others' needs. That's also valuable. The question is how to use that sensitivity in ways that don't sacrifice your own well-being. How to care for others without abandoning yourself. If you're emotionally avoidant, you have the ability to create distance from overwhelming experience. Sometimes that's exactly what's needed. The question is how to make it a choice rather than a default. How to access that distance when it serves you and set it aside when it doesn't. Do you see the difference? Instead of treating these patterns as problems to be eradicated, you treat them as capacities to be refined. Instead of fighting against your nature, you work with it. Instead of trying to become someone different, you become a more skillful version of who you already are. This is what I mean by redirecting rather than fixing. And it's a fundamentally different approach than what most self-improvement programs offer. The typical approach says, here's what's wrong with you, here's why it's wrong, here's how to eliminate it. The implicit message is that you are currently defective and need to become someone else. The approach I'm suggesting says, here's a trait you have, here's how it developed and what it was trying to do for you. Here's how to use it more skillfully. The implicit message is that you are currently whole and have untapped potential within what already exists. Which approach do you think leads to lasting change? Which one do you think creates peace rather than perpetual striving? I want to tell you about a man named Daniel. He came to me because he was, in his words, too aggressive. His aggression was ruining his relationships and threatening his career. He'd been told by multiple therapists that he had anger issues and needed to work on controlling his temper. He'd tried everything: anger management classes, meditation, counting to 10, deep breathing, journaling about the roots of his anger, understanding his triggers, processing his childhood experiences of being bullied. Nothing worked for long. He'd make progress. Then something would happen and he'd explode again. He was starting to believe that he was fundamentally flawed, that his anger was evidence of some deep defect in his character that might never be fixable. I asked him about his life before the anger became a problem. He told me he'd been a very successful entrepreneur. He'd built and sold 2 companies. He'd competed in martial arts at a high level. He'd pushed through obstacles that would have stopped most people. "What drove you through those obstacles?" I asked. He thought about it. "I don't know," he said. "I just refused to give up. I hated losing more than I loved winning. When something got in my way, I went at it until it moved." I pointed out that what he was describing sounded a lot like aggression. The same energy that was ruining his relationships had also built his businesses. The same intensity that alienated his partner had also won his martial arts competitions. The same force that he was trying to eliminate was the same force that had created most of his life's accomplishments. He stared at me. "Are you saying I shouldn't try to change?" "No," I said. "I'm saying you shouldn't try to eliminate your aggression. You should try to direct it better. The energy itself isn't the problem. The problem is that it's currently pointed at the wrong targets. It's leaking out in situations where it doesn't belong." This reframe changed everything for Daniel. Instead of seeing himself as a broken person with anger issues, he started seeing himself as a powerful person who needed better aim. Instead of trying to suppress his intensity, he started channeling it more consciously. He took up boxing again, giving the energy a physical outlet. He started a new business venture, giving it a constructive target. He practiced recognizing when he was misdirecting it toward people who didn't deserve it. His relationships improved, not because he became less aggressive, but because his aggression had somewhere else to go. His career thrived, not because he fixed what was wrong with him, but because he started using what was right with him more skillfully. The aggression was never the problem. The misdirection was the problem. And misdirection doesn't require years of therapeutic excavation to address. It requires awareness and redirection. This is available for every one of your so-called flaws. Whatever you've been trying to fix about yourself, I guarantee you there's another way to look at it. A way that honors the underlying capacity while redirecting how it expresses. You're not too sensitive. You're highly attuned. The question is what you're attuning to. You're not too intense. You have depth. The question is what you're applying that depth to. You're not too analytical. You have discernment. The question is what you're analyzing. You're not too emotional. You have access to the full range of human feeling. The question is how you're relating to those feelings. You're not too much. You're just pointed at the wrong things. Take a moment right now to think about the trait you've most wanted to fix about yourself, the one that's caused the most problems, the one that feels most fundamentally wrong. Now ask yourself, what is this trait trying to do for me? What capacity does it represent? If I could redirect it rather than eliminate it, where might it be useful? These questions open up possibilities that fixing never can, because fixing assumes defect, redirecting assumes potential, and you are full of potential that's been mislabeled as damage. Let's pause here for a visualization. I want you to close your eyes if it's safe to do so, or simply soften your gaze and turn your attention inward. Take a breath. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the weight of your body wherever you're sitting or lying down. Now I want you to call to mind a moment from your past when you felt completely okay. Not ecstatic, not achieving something great, just okay. Settled. At home in yourself. Maybe it was a quiet morning before anyone else was awake. Maybe it was a walk in nature. Maybe it was lying on the floor listening to music. Maybe it was a moment with a friend or loved one where nothing needed to be said or done. Find that memory. Let it become vivid. Notice where you were. Notice how your body felt. Notice the quality of your mind. In that moment, were you thinking about what was wrong with you? Were you analyzing your flaws? Were you planning your next self-improvement initiative? Probably not. You were just there, present, whole. The self-improvement project was nowhere to be found because it wasn't needed. You were simply being yourself without the commentary. This is who you actually are. This settled, okay, present version of yourself isn't some future state you need to achieve. It's what's already here, underneath all the noise, underneath all the self-criticism and analysis and fixing. You've touched it before, many times. You've just forgotten that it's your natural state rather than a special exception. Take another breath. Let the memory fade, but keep the feeling. This is what you're returning to, not arriving at. This is what becomes available when you stop trying to fix yourself and start simply being yourself. When you're ready, open your eyes. Now let's address something that might be coming up for you. If being okay is my natural state, why don't I feel okay most of the time? If I'm not broken, why do I feel broken? This is where we need to talk about the self-improvement trap, because here's the paradox. The very act of trying to improve yourself often makes you feel worse. Not immediately. At first, self-improvement feels good. There's the excitement of a new approach, the hope that this time things will be different, the sense of forward motion. But over time, something happens. You start to notice more problems. Every new book or workshop or therapy modality introduces you to another issue you hadn't known about, another pattern, another wound, another thing that needs to be fixed. Your standards keep rising. The more work you do on yourself, the more you expect of yourself. Progress that would have satisfied you years ago now seems insignificant. You're on a treadmill where faster never feels fast enough. Your identity becomes invested in the project. You start to think of yourself as someone who is working on themselves, someone on a growth journey, someone who is healing. Without the project, who would you even be? This is the trap. Self-improvement becomes self-perpetuating. The more you improve, the more you believe you need to improve. The more you fix, the more you find that needs fixing. The more you grow, the more growth seems required. I've seen people who've done 20 years of therapy and still don't feel ready to live their lives. I've seen people who've taken every workshop and read every book and still feel broken. I've seen people who've become professional self-improvers, coaching others while remaining stuck themselves. These people aren't failing at self-improvement. They're succeeding. And that success is keeping them trapped. Because here's the truth that the self-help industry doesn't want you to know. There is no amount of self-improvement that leads to finally feeling okay. The feeling of okayness doesn't come from fixing enough of your flaws. It comes from dropping the project entirely. It comes from stepping off the treadmill and recognizing that you were always already where you were trying to get to. This doesn't mean giving up on growth. Humans naturally develop and learn and change throughout their lives. That's healthy and good. What it means is giving up on growth as a prerequisite for okayness. It means separating the natural process of development from the neurotic project of fixing yourself. It means growing because it's interesting and alive, not because you're trying to earn your worthiness. Feel the difference between those two orientations. Growth from okayness versus growth toward okayness. In the first, you expand because that's what living beings do, and you enjoy the process because you're not burdened by the need for it to complete you. In the second, you strive because you're trying to reach a future state of finally being good enough. And the process is exhausting because it's driven by insufficiency. Same behaviors might occur. The person growing from okayness and the person growing toward okayness might read the same books, attend the same workshops, practice the same techniques. But the internal experience is completely different. And the results are completely different. Growth from okayness actually transforms you because you're not gripping it so tightly. Growth toward okayness keeps you stuck because the very orientation perpetuates the feeling of not okayness that drives it. How do you know which one you're in? Here's a simple test. If you stopped all self-improvement activities tomorrow, how would you feel? If the answer is relieved, if some part of you would exhale with freedom, you're probably stuck in the trap. You're using self-improvement compulsively, not joyfully. You're trying to fix what isn't broken. If the answer is neutral, if you could take it or leave it, you're probably in a healthy relationship with growth. You engage with it when it serves you and set it aside when it doesn't. If the answer is anxious, if the thought of stopping makes you panic about all the things that would go wrong, that's the clearest sign you've made self-improvement into an identity. You can't imagine yourself without the project because you've forgotten who you were before you started it. Let me tell you about Maya. She was a self-improvement veteran. 15 years of dedicated work, therapy, retreats, workshops, coaches, countless books. She'd made personal growth her lifestyle and eventually her career. She became a life coach, helping others with their transformation journeys. But something wasn't working. Despite all her expertise, despite the fact that she could fluently explain attachment theory and trauma responses and nervous system regulation, she didn't feel at peace. If anything, she felt more anxious than ever, more convinced that something was wrong, more certain that the real breakthrough was just around the corner. A friend challenged her. What if you're overthinking this? What if all the work is actually keeping you stuck? Maya was offended. How could growth be the problem? How could self-awareness be bad? This was her identity, her career, her entire worldview. But the question haunted her. She started to notice things she'd ignored before. How anxious she felt when she missed a meditation session. How she couldn't have a simple conversation without analyzing the dynamics. How she couldn't experience a difficult emotion without immediately trying to process it. how exhausted she was from the constant monitoring and management of her own psyche. She decided to try an experiment. 1 month of no self-improvement, no journaling about her feelings, no analyzing her triggers, no reading books about growth, no listening to podcasts about healing, no practicing techniques, no working on herself at all. The first week was brutal. She didn't know what to do with herself. She felt like an addict without her substance. Every time she reached for a familiar tool, she had to stop herself. Every time she started to analyze something, she had to let it go. But somewhere in the second week, something shifted. She started to notice things outside herself. The trees in her neighborhood that she'd walked past for years without seeing. The neighbor she'd never actually talked to. The hobbies she'd abandoned because they weren't productive or growth-oriented. By the end of the month, Maya felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the temporary peace of a meditation retreat, or the conceptual peace of understanding why she wasn't at peace. Actual peace. The kind that doesn't require anything. She realized that all her years of self-improvement had been a very sophisticated form of distraction, a way of staying in her head instead of living her life, a way of always being in a future state of improvement rather than a present state of existence. She didn't abandon growth entirely, but she fundamentally changed her relationship to it. She stopped making it the center of her life. She stopped treating it as a requirement for okayness. She started engaging with it the way you might engage with a hobby. Interesting, enriching, but not essential. Not the point of existence. Her coaching practice changed too. She stopped helping people analyze themselves into the ground. She started helping them get out of their heads and into their lives. She became more effective because she was no longer unconsciously invested in keeping people in the self-improvement trap that had kept her stuck for so long. What Maya discovered is available to you too. The peace you're seeking through self-improvement exists on the other side of self-improvement. Not after you've completed the project, but after you've abandoned it. This is the paradox at the heart of genuine transformation. You cannot fix your way to wholeness, because the fixing itself creates the fragmentation. You cannot improve your way to okayness, because the improving itself generates the not okayness. You cannot become enough, because the becoming itself is a statement of not enoughness. The only way out is to stop playing the game entirely. To recognize that you were whole before you started trying to become whole. To see that the project was never necessary. To let yourself be what you already are. This is what we'll explore in the remaining chapters. Not how to improve more skillfully, but how to stop improving entirely. Not how to fix yourself better, but how to recognize you were never broken. Not how to become who you want to be, but how to remember who you already are. Let's talk about presence over progress, because this is where everything we've been discussing becomes practical. Presence is a word that's been overused in self-help circles. It's been turned into another goal to achieve, another state to attain, another thing you're failing at when you're not present enough. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the simple, direct experience of being here, not thinking about being here, not trying to be here, not evaluating how well you're being here, just here, right now, in this moment. Where is your attention? Is it with these words? Is it drifting to something else? Is it partially here and partially planning what you're going to do later? Notice without judgment. Just notice. Now, Gently, bring your full attention to the present moment. Not to your thoughts about the present moment, but to the present moment itself. What do you actually perceive right now? What sounds are there? What sensations in your body? What is your direct, unmediated experience? This is presence. Nothing more. Nothing mystical or difficult about it. Just being here instead of being lost in thought. What does this have to do with stopping the self-improvement project? Everything. When you're present, the self-improvement project doesn't exist. You can't be fully here and also be worrying about whether you're good enough. You can't be absorbed in direct experience and also be analyzing your patterns. You can't be present and also be trying to fix yourself. The two are mutually exclusive. Self-improvement requires stepping out of the present moment, mentally, to compare yourself to some imagined standard. It requires thinking about yourself rather than being yourself. It requires the evaluator who stands outside of experience and judges it. When you're present, there's no evaluator. There's just what's happening. And what's happening doesn't need to be fixed because it's not a self. It's just experience. This is the radical act I'm inviting. Choosing presence over progress. Choosing to be here rather than to become better. Choosing the direct experience of your life over the mental project of optimizing it. I know this sounds like giving up. I know it sounds like settling for less than you could be. The self-improvement mindset is deeply ingrained, and it tells you that presence is complacency, that being here is the same as stagnating. But that's not what happens. When you choose presence, something remarkable occurs. You actually change faster. Not because you're trying to, but because you're no longer resisting what is. The energy you were spending on self-criticism becomes available for other things. The patterns you were fighting against when left alone often dissolve on their own. And even if nothing changes, even if you stay exactly who you are forever, you get to actually enjoy it. You get to experience your life instead of constantly evaluating it. You get to be here for the time you have left, rather than waiting for a future state that never arrives. What's the point of becoming a better person if you're never present to enjoy being that person? What's the point of all the growth if you're so focused on growing that you miss the actual living? Presence isn't a state you achieve. It's something you choose moment by moment. Right now, you can choose to be here. And right now, and right now. Each moment offers the same invitation, and each moment you can accept or decline. When you decline, when you get lost in thinking about yourself and your flaws and your growth journey, nothing terrible happens. You just miss that moment. It passes unused, unnoticed, unlived. When you accept, when you show up fully for whatever's happening, that moment is complete. Nothing else is needed. You aren't measuring yourself against a standard or planning your next improvement initiative or analyzing whether you should feel differently. You're just here. What I'm teaching you is not a technique for becoming more present. It's a recognition that presence is always available and that you're simply choosing thought instead. The problem isn't that you don't know how to be present. The problem is that you keep finding thinking more interesting. And thinking isn't more interesting, it's just more familiar. It's just where you've been living for so long that you've forgotten there's anywhere else to live. The practice, if you want to call it that, is simply to notice when you've wandered into thinking and to come back. Not to judge the wandering, not to analyze why you wandered, not to develop a strategy for wandering less, just to notice and return. You will wander thousands of times. That's not failure. That's the practice. Each return is a success, no matter how many times you've wandered. Each moment of presence is valuable, even if it's brief. Over time, something shifts. Not because you've achieved some advanced state of presence, but because you've changed your habit. You've weakened the pathway to constant self-analysis and strengthened the pathway to being here. The default starts to change. Instead of thinking being the norm and presence being occasional, presence becomes more frequent, and thinking becomes more obviously optional. This is what's available, not through more self-improvement, but through the abandonment of self-improvement. Not through trying harder, but through trying less. Not through fixing yourself, but through recognizing you were never broken. Now let's address something important. How do you work with your nature rather than against it? This is where the redirection we talked about earlier becomes concrete. You have certain tendencies, certain patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior that have been with you for a long time. The self-improvement approach says these need to change. The approach I'm suggesting says these need to be channeled. Think about a river. A river has a natural flow carved out over thousands of years. You can fight against that flow, trying to make the water go in a different direction. But it takes enormous energy, and the moment you stop fighting, the water returns to its original course. Or you can work with the flow. You can dig channels that direct the water where you want it to go while still honoring its natural direction. The water still flows. You're not fighting its nature. You're just guiding it more skillfully. You are like that river. You have a natural flow. Tendencies that have been developing your entire life. You can spend decades fighting against them, trying to force yourself to be different. Or you can learn to channel them. Here's how this works practically. Start by identifying your strongest tendencies. Not the ones you like or the ones you think you should have, but the ones that actually show up most consistently in your life. Maybe you have a tendency toward intensity. Everything you do fully. When you're interested in something, you're obsessed. When you care about someone, you care deeply. When you're angry, you're really angry. The self-improvement approach says your intensity is too much. You need to calm down, be more moderate, learn to regulate. The redirection approach says your intensity is a power source. Let's figure out what it should be powering. Someone with natural intensity might channel it into work they care about, where obsessive focus is actually an asset. They might channel it into physical activity, where going all in burns off excess energy. They might channel it into advocacy for causes they believe in, where passion makes a difference. What they don't need is to become less intense. They need to become more intentional about where their intensity goes. Or maybe you have a tendency toward caution. You analyze before you act. You consider worst-case scenarios. You take your time making decisions. The self-improvement approach says you're too cautious. You need to take more risks, be more spontaneous, stop overthinking. The redirection approach says your caution is a gift for avoiding preventable problems. Let's make sure it's applied to things where caution actually matters. Someone with natural caution might be excellent at risk assessment, project planning, quality control. They might be the person who catches problems before they become disasters. They might be the voice of reason that balances more impulsive tendencies in a team. What they don't need is to become reckless. They need to recognize where their caution is valuable and where it's excessive. This is the reframe for any tendency you have. Instead of asking, "How do I fix this?" ask, "Where does this belong?" Your tendency to worry belongs in planning for actual risks, not in ruminating about unlikely scenarios. Your tendency to please others belongs in customer service or hospitality or caregiving, not in sacrificing your own needs. Your tendency to control belongs in organizing projects or managing systems, not in trying to control other people. Your tendency to avoid conflict belongs in diplomacy or mediation, not in suppressing your own voice. Every single trait has a context where it's appropriate. The problem is never the trait itself. The problem is always the mismatch between the trait and the context. So, if you're feeling like something is wrong with you, ask a different question. Instead of "What do I need to fix?" ask what context would make this trait an asset. Sometimes the answer requires changing external circumstances, finding a different job that suits your nature, choosing relationships with people who appreciate your traits rather than criticize them, designing a lifestyle that works with your tendencies rather than against them. Sometimes the answer requires changing internal habits, recognizing when a trait is being applied inappropriately and consciously redirecting it, learning to pause between impulse and action to choose where the energy goes. Either way, the work is redirection, not repair. You're not trying to become someone different. You're trying to deploy who you already are more skillfully. This is profoundly more respectful to yourself than the fixing approach. It honors who you are. It recognizes that your nature isn't a mistake. It treats your traits as resources to be managed rather than defects to be eliminated. And it works better. People who try to change their fundamental nature almost always fail, or they succeed temporarily and then rebound. People who learn to channel their nature often thrive because they're working with something rather than against it. Here's an exercise for putting this into practice. Take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. On the left side, list your 3 strongest tendencies, the ones that show up most consistently in your life. Be honest. Include the ones you've been told are problems. On the right side, for each tendency, list 3 contexts where it would be an asset. 3 situations where that exact trait would be exactly what's needed. Now look at your current life. Are you in those contexts? Are you spending time in situations where your nature is valued? If not, there's your work. Not fixing yourself, but repositioning yourself. Not becoming different, but finding where you belong. Let me tell you about someone who did this work. Sarah had always been told she was too serious. "Lighten up," people said. "Why do you have to make everything so heavy?" She'd spent years trying to be more fun, more lighthearted, more easygoing. It never worked for long. Her natural gravity always reasserted itself. She'd find herself thinking deeply about things other people breezed past. She'd want to discuss meaningful topics when everyone else wanted to chat about nothing. Then she made a change. Instead of trying to become lighter, she leaned into her seriousness. She took a job in bioethics, where wrestling with heavy questions wasn't a flaw, but a requirement. She found friends who also wanted to talk about meaningful things. She stopped apologizing for her depth and started treating it as her signature strength. The result wasn't that she became fun. She was still serious, but she was serious in contexts where seriousness mattered. And suddenly, the trait that had felt like a burden became the source of her greatest contributions. She didn't fix herself, she redirected herself, and the difference was everything. Now let's explore something that might be uncomfortable: the wholeness you forgot you had. Somewhere in your history, before all the conditioning and criticism and self-improvement projects, you knew you were whole. There was a time, however brief, when you didn't doubt yourself, when you didn't analyze yourself, when you simply were yourself without any sense that there was a problem to be solved. For most people, this was very early in life, before the age of 5 or 6, before school and social pressure and comparative achievement. There was a time when you played without worrying whether you were playing right, when you expressed yourself without wondering what others thought, when you existed without justification. That wholeness didn't go anywhere. It didn't get damaged or lost. It got covered over. Layer upon layer of beliefs and judgments and self-criticism buried it. But it's still there, underneath everything, waiting to be remembered. I want to help you remember. Think back to your earliest memories. Not memories of events, but memories of how it felt to be you. Before anyone told you something was wrong with you, before you learned to compare yourself to others, before the project of self-improvement began. What was that like? Can you access even a whisper of it? For some people, this is easy. They can recall a specific moment of unself-conscious joy, a time when they were playing and lost track of everything except the play itself. For others, it's harder. The memories are buried deep, or they never existed in a clear form. The conditioning started early, maybe at birth, and there's no before to remember. If you're in the second group, you can still do this exercise. Instead of remembering, imagine. Imagine what it would feel like to exist without self-doubt. Imagine what it would be like to be in your body without judgment. Imagine simply being here, with nothing wrong and nothing to fix. Whether you're remembering or imagining, see if you can contact that state right now. It might be just a flicker. That's enough. That flicker is evidence. It proves that wholeness is possible for you because you've touched it before, or you're touching it now in imagination. That wholeness is not something you need to achieve. It's something you need to stop covering over. It's not a future state you're working toward. It's a present reality you're ignoring. Every moment of self-criticism covers it over. Every thought that something is wrong with you buries it deeper. Every self-improvement project adds another layer between you and what was always there. And every moment of presence, every time you stop the mental activity and just be here, you get a glimpse of it again. The layers thin. The covering becomes more transparent. Wholeness shines through. This is why presence matters so much, not because it's a good state to achieve, but because in presence, the covering dissolves. You can't be fully present and also maintain the belief that you're broken. The two are incompatible. Presence is wholeness, experienced directly. Right now, as you listen to these words, there's a part of you that knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's not confused. It's not skeptical. It's just nodding along, saying, yes, this is true. That part of you is the wholeness I'm pointing toward. It's been there all along. It's been waiting for you to stop ignoring it. It's been patiently persistent underneath all your struggles and self-improvement projects and beliefs about your defectiveness. And it will still be there when all of that falls away, when you finally stop fighting yourself, when you finally stop trying to become something other than what you are, when you finally rest in the truth that has always been true. You are whole. You have always been whole. Nothing needs to be fixed because nothing was ever broken. Now let's get practical about what it looks like to build a life that supports this understanding. The environment you live in matters, not because it determines your wholeness, but because it either supports your recognition of wholeness or makes it harder. Some environments constantly trigger the feeling that something is wrong. Others invite presence and peace. Think about your physical space. Does it remind you of your inadequacy, or does it reflect acceptance of who you are? Are there items around you that represent failed self-improvement projects, books you never finished, exercise equipment you never use, reminders of who you were supposed to become? Or does your space reflect who you actually are, imperfect and complete? Think about your information diet. Are you constantly consuming content that tells you you need to be fixed? Self-help books and podcasts and social media? Accounts that profit from your sense of not enoughness? Or have you curated what you take in to support presence and self-acceptance? Think about your relationships. Are you surrounded by people who see you as a project, who are always trying to improve you, or who remind you of your flaws? Or are you surrounded by people who accept you as you are, who don't need you to change to love you? These things matter, not because they create wholeness, but because they either obscure it or allow it to shine through. Here's an exercise. Walk through your physical space with fresh eyes. Look at every object and ask, does this remind me of my wholeness or my brokenness? You might be surprised by what you find. That stack of self-help books you never finished. That vision board from 3 years ago with none of its goals achieved. That bathroom scale you step on every morning to evaluate yourself. Consider removing the things that reinforce your sense of deficiency, not because they're bad, but because they're not serving you. You can pursue growth from a place of wholeness. You don't need environmental cues constantly reminding you that you're not good enough. Similarly with your information diet. For 1 week, avoid all content that tells you to improve yourself. No self-help books, no productivity podcasts, no inspirational social media. Instead, take in content that asks nothing of you. Fiction, nature, documentaries, music, art, things that are enjoyed rather than applied. Notice how you feel at the end of that week. Do you feel less motivated, as you might fear? Or do you feel more peaceful, less driven by the anxiety of not enoughness? And your relationships. Start paying attention to how you feel around different people. Some people, after spending time with them, you feel more yourself, more accepted, more at ease. Others, after spending time with them, you feel evaluated, judged, like you need to perform or improve. Gravitate toward the first group. Set boundaries with the second. Not because they're bad people, but because your environment matters, and you deserve to be surrounded by acceptance rather than constant evaluation. Building a life that supports wholeness doesn't mean abandoning all structure and discipline. It means choosing structure and discipline that work with your nature rather than against it. It means designing a life you don't need to escape from, rather than a life that requires constant recovery. Some questions to guide this design. What would I do with my time if I weren't trying to become a better person? What activities bring me alive without promising future improvement? Who accepts me exactly as I am right now? What environment makes me feel most at home in myself? These questions point toward a life of wholeness rather than perpetual striving. A life where you do things because they're meaningful, not because they'll optimize you. Where you rest because rest is good, not because it's productive. Where you show up as yourself, not as a project in progress. This might require significant changes. It might mean leaving a job that constantly triggers your insufficiency. It might mean ending relationships with people who only see your potential, never your current reality. It might mean abandoning goals you thought were yours, but were actually just attempts to earn okayness. Or it might require only small changes, a different morning routine, a cleaned-out bookshelf, a new boundary with a critical friend. The specifics depend on your situation. What doesn't depend on your situation is the principle. Your environment either supports your recognition of wholeness or obscures it. You get to choose your environment. Choose one that supports you. Now we need to address something that will definitely happen. You're going to relapse into fixing. It doesn't matter how deeply you understand everything I'm saying. It doesn't matter how committed you are to dropping the self-improvement project. At some point, probably soon, you're going to find yourself right back in it, analyzing what's wrong with you, planning how to fix it, caught in the familiar trap of not enoughness. This isn't failure. This is just how deeply conditioned you are. You've spent years, maybe decades, believing you need to be fixed. That belief doesn't disappear just because you've heard a compelling alternative. It's woven into your neural pathways, your habits, your identity. So when the relapse happens, what do? First, recognize it. This is harder than it sounds because the fixing mindset is very clever. It disguises itself. It says things like, I'm not trying to fix myself, I'm just trying to understand myself. Or I'm not being self-critical, I'm just being honest about my flaws. Or I know I'm already whole, but I still need to work on my anxiety. These are all fixing in disguise. The content varies, but the underlying structure is the same. Something is wrong with me, and I need to do something about it. So, develop an early warning system. What are the signs that you've slipped back into fixing mode? For many people, it starts with increased mental activity. More thinking about themselves, more analyzing, more planning for change. For others, it shows up as tension in the body. The shoulders creep up, the jaw tightens. There's a subtle sense of striving, of efforting, that wasn't there before. For others, it's a change in mood, a subtle anxiety or dissatisfaction that underlies everything. A feeling that something is wrong even though nothing specific has happened. Learn your own signals. Know what it looks like when you start to slip. This awareness is your first line of defense. Second, interrupt the pattern. Don't try to analyze why you relapsed. Don't make a plan for relapsing less in the future. Don't turn the relapse itself into another self-improvement project. Just stop. Take a breath. Come back to the present moment. Feel your body. Notice what's actually happening right now, not what you're thinking about. The interruption doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be as simple as 3 conscious breaths. It can be a brief moment of feeling your feet on the ground. It can be looking out the window and really seeing what's there. What it can't be is more thinking. You can't think your way out of the fixing trap because thinking is the trap. Every thought about not thinking is just more thinking. Third, be compassionate with yourself. This is the tricky part because compassion can easily become another form of fixing. I need to be more compassionate with myself. I should practice self-compassion. See how even compassion gets co-opted by the project? Real compassion isn't a technique. It's just not being mean to yourself. When you notice you've relapsed, don't add judgment on top. Don't criticize yourself for criticizing yourself. Don't fix your fixing. Just acknowledge what happened. Oh, I slipped back into that pattern. Interesting. And return to presence. No big deal. No drama. Just a gentle correction, like steering a car that's drifted slightly out of its lane. You might have to do this correction 100 times a day at first. That's fine. Each correction is a success. Each return to presence is practice. Each time you catch yourself fixing and stop, you're weakening the old pattern and strengthening a new one. Over time, the relapses become less frequent. Not because you've fixed the tendency to fix, but because you've developed a new habit. The habit of catching yourself and coming back. The habit of not taking the thoughts so seriously. The habit of presence. And here's what's beautiful about this process. It doesn't require perfection. You don't have to stop fixing yourself completely. You just have to notice when you're doing it and come back, again and again, imperfectly and incompletely. That's enough. Because the goal isn't to become someone who never has self-critical thoughts. The goal is to become someone who doesn't believe those thoughts, who doesn't act on them, who lets them pass through without building a whole project around them. That person still has the thoughts. They just have a different relationship with them. The thoughts arise, and they're recognized as thoughts, not truths, not marching orders, just mental weather passing through a clear sky. Let me tell you about a simple practice that helps with this. It's called the 3-breath return. Whenever you notice you've slipped into fixing mode, you take 3 breaths. That's it. On the first breath, you acknowledge what happened. There I go again, trying to fix myself. Just recognition, no judgment. On the second breath, you feel your body, the physical sensations of being here, your feet on the ground, the chair beneath you, the air on your skin. On the third breath, you let the fixing go. You don't push it away. You just stop engaging with it. You let it be there while you turn your attention to something else. 3 breaths, maybe 15 seconds, and you're back. This isn't a fix for fixing. It's not a technique that will make the pattern go away. It's just a way of not feeding the pattern when it arises. A way of not getting caught for as long. Use it freely. Use it 100 times a day, if necessary. There's no limit on returns to presence. Each one is valuable. Each one is a small victory. Each one makes the next return slightly easier. Now, let's explore something beautiful. What happens when you stop trying to fix yourself in relationships? Most relationships are secretly fix-it projects. We choose partners hoping they'll complete us. We try to change them into the people we think they should be. We accept love conditionally, based on whether someone is meeting our standards. And we do the same in reverse. We show up as projects in progress, hoping to earn love through our improvement. We hide the parts of ourselves we haven't fixed yet. We promise to become better, as though our current selves aren't lovable. This is exhausting, and it doesn't create intimacy. It creates performance. Both people pretending to be better than they are, hiding their flaws, hoping to earn something they believe they haven't yet deserved. What would relationships look like without the fixing project? First, You'd stop trying to change your partner, not because you'd approve of everything they do, but because you'd recognize them as whole. Just as you're learning to see yourself as whole despite your imperfections, you'd extend the same recognition to them. This doesn't mean tolerating abuse or accepting treatment that harms you. It means releasing the subtle, constant project of making your partner into someone else. The suggestions for improvement, the vision of who they could be, the disappointment when they remain stubbornly themselves. People sense when you're trying to fix them. Even if you never say it out loud, they feel it. And that feeling makes intimacy impossible. How can you be fully yourself with someone who's always evaluating you, always waiting for you to become better? When you stop trying to fix your partner, something remarkable happens. They relax. They start to show you parts of themselves they've been hiding. They trust you with their imperfections because they've learned you won't try to improve them away. And paradoxically, this is when real change becomes possible. Not because you demanded it, but because they feel safe enough to grow. People don't change when they're constantly criticized. They change when they're fully accepted and then choose to grow from that foundation. Second, you'd stop showing up as a project yourself. You'd let your partner see you as you actually are, flaws included, without apology and without promises to improve. This is terrifying for most people. We've been conditioned to believe we're only lovable in our best moments, in our Instagram-filtered version of ourselves. Showing the unfiltered truth feels like a risk, like they might leave when they see what's really there. But here's what actually happens. When you show up fully, imperfections visible, something deepens. Your partner realizes they don't have to perform either. Mutual vulnerability creates connection that performance never can. And if someone can only love your improved version, not your actual version, that's important information. Better to know now than to spend years maintaining a false front, never sure if you're loved for who you are or who you're pretending to be. The relationships that survive the dropping of pretense are the relationships worth having. The ones that don't survive weren't real anyway. They were two fix-it projects in mutual orbit, never actually touching. Third, you'd stop making love conditional. This might be the biggest shift of all. Most of us have implicit conditions on love. I'll love you if you meet my needs. I'll love you when you've worked on that thing that bothers me. I'll love you as long as you're moving in the right direction. These conditions seem reasonable. They seem like good boundaries. But they're not love. They're contracts. They're exchanges. They're the relationship equivalent of the self-improvement trap. Unconditional love doesn't mean accepting harm. It doesn't mean having no boundaries. It means that your fundamental regard for another person isn't contingent on their behavior. You might set boundaries. You might choose to leave. But you don't withdraw love as a punishment or withhold it as leverage. This is only possible when you love yourself unconditionally first. As long as you're withholding self-acceptance pending improvement, you'll do the same to others. The outer reflects the inner. So the work, if you want to call it that, is always on yourself first. Not fixing yourself, but accepting yourself. Then extending that same acceptance to others. Then watching relationships transform from mutual improvement projects into something much more beautiful. Mutual recognition of wholeness, mutual acceptance of imperfection, mutual presence without agenda. What would it feel like to be in a relationship where neither of you were trying to fix the other? Where both of you showed up as you are, without apology? Where love wasn't something to be earned, but something freely given? That's what becomes possible when you drop the fixing project. First with yourself, then with everyone else. Now we need to address the final question. Who are you when you're no longer working on yourself? This question can bring up real fear. If you've organized your identity around self-improvement, the prospect of dropping that project might feel like facing a void. Who would you be without the growth journey? What would you do without the latest book or workshop or technique? What would you even talk about at parties? These fears are real, but they're based on a misunderstanding. You're not going to become empty when you stop trying to fill yourself. You're not going to become stagnant when you stop trying to improve. You're not going to become nobody when you stop trying to become somebody. What actually happens is the opposite. When the self-improvement project ends, what's left is you. Not the project you, not the becoming you, just you. The person who was there all along, underneath all the striving. And that person turns out to be interesting, not in a polished, optimized way, in a real way, a human way, with quirks and contradictions and rough edges and unexpected depths. You've been so busy trying to become someone that you haven't gotten to know who you already are. You've been so focused on the destination that you haven't noticed who's been making the journey all along. When the project ends, you get to meet yourself. Maybe for the first time. What do you actually like when you're not trying to like the right things? What do you actually want when you're not trying to want what successful people want? What do you actually think when you're not trying to think what enlightened people think? These questions might take time to answer. The real you has been buried under layers of should and supposed to. It might take some excavation to find. But this excavation is different from the self-analysis we've been critiquing. You're not digging to find what's wrong. You're digging to find what's there. You're not analyzing to fix. You're exploring to discover. And what you discover might surprise you. The real you might have interests you've judged as trivial, opinions you've suppressed as unacceptable, ways of being that don't fit the self-improvement templates. That's okay. That's more than okay. That's the whole point. The you that exists when you stop trying to be someone else is the only you that can actually live your life. Everything else is performance. Everything else is second-hand, derivative, borrowed from books and teachers and cultural expectations. Only the real you can have real relationships. Only the real you can do real work. Only the real you can be present for your actual life as it actually unfolds. So, when the self-improvement project ends, what begins is authenticity. Not as another thing to achieve, but as the natural consequence of not pretending. Let me offer a final exercise. Write one paragraph describing who you are without reference to growth, healing, becoming, or improvement. Describe yourself as though you were complete, as though nothing needed to change, as though this version of you was the final version. What would that paragraph say? This isn't about settling or giving up. It's about meeting yourself where you actually are. It's about finding out who shows up when you stop waiting for a better version. Because that person, the one who shows up, is the one you get to be. Not the imagined future you, not the potential you, this you, here, now, complete. Can you meet them? Can you be them? Can you let that be enough? As we approach the end of our time together, I want to bring everything we've explored into focus. You started this audiobook believing something was wrong with you. That's probably why you picked it up. Another book, another attempt to find what's missing. But now you've encountered a different possibility. The possibility that nothing was ever wrong. The possibility that you were whole before you started and whole right now, regardless of what you've achieved or failed to achieve on the self-improvement path. This isn't a new belief to adopt. It's not a more enlightened philosophy to subscribe to. It's a direct recognition of what's true. You can verify it in your own experience. In those moments of presence when the self-criticism stops, is anything wrong? In those gaps between thoughts when you're just here, is there a problem to be solved? The answer, if you look honestly, is no. In presence, there's nothing wrong. In presence, you are simply what you are, and that's enough. The insufficiency only returns when thinking returns, when comparison returns, when the self-improvement project starts up again. This is the key insight. Your sense of brokenness isn't a perception of reality. It's a thought pattern. And thought patterns can be interrupted. They can be starved of the attention that feeds them. They can be allowed to fade as you invest your energy elsewhere. You have tools. Now, you understand that distraction disguises itself as damage. You know how the attention economy of your inner world works. You can recognize when you're in fixing mode and return to presence. You can redirect your traits instead of trying to eliminate them. You can build environments that support your recognition of wholeness. And you know what becomes possible. On the other side, relationships without the constant project of mutual improvement. Work that uses your actual nature rather than fighting it. Rest that doesn't feel like failure. Joy that doesn't need to be earned. A life experienced rather than constantly evaluated. This is not about becoming someone different. It's about stopping the exhausting effort to become someone different. It's about finally arriving where you've always been. There's a story about a seeker who traveled far to find a wise teacher. The seeker asked, "How do I find myself?" The teacher said, "Stop hiding." The seeker was confused. "But I'm not hiding. I've been searching everywhere." The teacher smiled. "Exactly. While you were searching everywhere, you couldn't find what was right here. Stop searching and you'll stop hiding. What you're looking for has been looking out of your eyes this whole time. You are what you've been looking for, not a future, improved version of you. This, you, the one hearing these words, the one who's been on the journey, the one who's been trying so hard. You can stop trying. You can rest. You can let yourself be what you already are. Not because you've finally fixed enough to deserve rest, but because rest was always available and the fixing was never necessary. You were never broken. You were just distracted. And now you know. Distraction will come again. Thoughts of inadequacy will arise. The old patterns will reassert themselves. That's okay. You're not trying to achieve a permanent state of enlightened wholeness. You're just learning to come back, to notice when you've wandered into fixing and return to being, to catch the old thoughts and let them pass, to touch presence again and again, however briefly. That's enough. That's everything, actually. Not perfect presence, just presence recovered. Not the end of thinking, just a different relationship with thoughts, not the elimination of old patterns, just the growing ability to not believe them. You already know how to do this. You've been doing it your whole life, in those moments when you forgot to judge yourself. when you were lost in play or work or conversation, when you were so present that there was no one standing outside evaluating. Those moments weren't special states you achieved. They were glimpses of your natural condition, what you are when you're not trying to be something else. That's still available. Right now, in this moment, take a breath. Feel yourself here. Let the project go, just for a moment. What's left? You. Here. Whole. Welcome back. Before we close, I want to share one more story. It's about a woman named Elena who discovered something that changed how she understood her entire life. Elena had been in therapy since she was 19. She was now 43. 24 years of working on herself. She'd tried cognitive behavioral therapy, psychoanalysis, EMDR, somatic experiencing, internal family systems, and at least a dozen other modalities she could barely remember. Each one helped for a while. Each one revealed new layers of damage to be addressed. Each one convinced her that she was finally getting to the root of her problems. But the problems never quite ended. As soon as one was resolved, another emerged. It was like her psyche was an infinite onion, layers within layers, each one revealing more tears. One day, her therapist of 5 years retired. Elena felt devastated. Who would help her continue the work? How would she manage her issues without professional support? She asked for a referral, but the therapist said something unexpected. "You know, Elena, I wonder if you might try something different. What if you took a break from therapy altogether, just for 6 months? See what happens when you're not actively working on yourself." Elena was terrified. She'd never been without a therapist in her entire adult life. The idea felt like walking a tightrope without a net. But something in her was also curious. 24 years was a long time. What did she have to show for it? Yes, she understood herself better. Yes, she had language for her patterns. But was she actually happier? Was she more at peace? If she was honest, the answer was unclear. She agreed to the experiment. 6 months without therapy. 6 months without actively processing or analyzing or working through. 6 months of just living. The first month was hard. She felt like she was abandoning herself. Every time a difficult feeling arose, her instinct was to examine it, trace it to its source, process it through some technique. Without those familiar moves, she felt lost. But gradually, something shifted. Without the constant attention to her inner world, she started noticing the outer world more. The trees in her neighborhood that she'd never really seen. The barista who always remembered her order. The way light came through her kitchen window in the morning. She also noticed that most of her difficult feelings, when left alone, simply passed. They arose, they were uncomfortable, and then they faded. Without the processing, without the analysis, without the attempt to understand and fix, they just moved through her like weather. By month 4, something remarkable had happened. Elena felt lighter than she had in years, not because her issues were resolved, but because she wasn't carrying the weight of working on them anymore. She still had anxiety. She still had moments of depression. She still had relationship patterns she didn't love. But she wasn't making a project out of any of it. She was just living, imperfectly, like everyone else. When the 6 months ended, Elena didn't go back to therapy. Not because therapy was bad, but because she finally understood something. The work was never going to end. There would always be another layer to process, another wound to heal, another pattern to address. The only way out of the endless project was to step off the treadmill entirely. She wrote her retired therapist a letter. "You gave me the greatest gift," she said. "You gave me permission to stop. I spent 24 years trying to fix myself, and it turns out I was never broken. I was just a human being having human experiences, and I'd pathologized the whole thing. I'm not saying I'll never go to therapy again. Maybe I will, if something comes up that really needs professional support. But I'm done with therapy as a lifestyle. I'm done treating my existence as a problem to be solved. I'm done waiting to heal before I live. I'm just going to live. That's it. That's the whole thing." Elena's story might resonate with you, or it might seem extreme, irresponsible even. She had real issues, you might think. She shouldn't just abandon the work. But here's what I want you to consider. What if the work itself was preventing her from living? What if all those years of therapy were less about healing and more about avoiding life through the respectable cover of self-improvement? I'm not anti-therapy. I've said this before, but it bears repeating. Professional support can be valuable, even essential for genuine mental health conditions. But there's a difference between therapy as treatment and therapy as lifestyle. There's a difference between addressing a specific wound and spending decades excavating your psyche. At some point, the digging becomes its own problem. At some point, the self-improvement becomes self-avoidance. At some point, you have to put down the shovel and start building something. Elena found that point. She stepped off the treadmill. She stopped waiting to be fixed and started living as if she already was. That same possibility is available to you. There's one more thing I want to address before we part. It's the question of what to do when life gets hard. Because life will get hard. Dropping the self-improvement project doesn't protect you from difficulty. You'll still face loss, disappointment, failure, pain. The human experience includes all of these, regardless of how whole you recognize yourself to be. So what do you do when difficulty comes? If not try to fix yourself, you feel it. That's the simple answer. You feel what you feel, without making it mean something about your fundamental adequacy. When you lose someone you love, you grieve. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because love and loss go together. The grief isn't a problem to be processed. It's the appropriate response to having loved. When you fail at something important, you feel the disappointment. Not because failure proves your inadequacy, but because you cared and it didn't work out. The disappointment isn't evidence of damage. It's evidence of investment. When anxiety arises before a big event, you feel the nervousness. Not because you have an anxiety disorder that needs treatment, but because you're a human being facing uncertainty. The anxiety isn't a flaw. It's your organism responding to the unknown. In each case, the feeling is just a feeling. It arises, it's uncomfortable, and eventually it passes. What creates suffering isn't the feeling itself. It's what we add to it. The judgment, the resistance, the meaning-making that turns temporary discomfort into permanent identity. Oh no, I'm anxious again. Something must be wrong with me. I thought I dealt with this. Why am I still like this? That's not feeling the anxiety. That's adding a whole layer of suffering on top of it. That's turning a passing weather system into a permanent climate. The alternative is radical simplicity. Anxiety is here. Okay, it feels like this. And then you continue with your life, the anxiety alongside you, rather than stopping everything to figure out what the anxiety means and how to fix it. This isn't suppression. You're not pushing the feeling away or pretending it doesn't exist. You're just not elaborating on it. You're not building a narrative around it. You're not making it into a thing. Feelings are remarkably tolerable when you don't add to them. Even very difficult feelings, when experienced directly without the secondary layer of resistance and meaning-making, turn out to be survivable. They hurt, yes, but they don't destroy you. They move through, as all things move through. What destroys people isn't the feelings themselves. It's the war against the feelings, the desperate attempt to not feel what they're feeling, the conviction that something is wrong because they feel bad. Nothing is wrong when you feel bad. You're just feeling bad. It's part of the deal. It's built into the human experience. And it passes. When you stop trying to fix your feelings, something paradoxical happens. They often resolve faster. Without the resistance, without the analysis, without the attempt to make them mean something, they simply flow through. They don't get stuck because you're not holding on to them with your attention. So, when life gets hard, feel what you feel. Let it be hard. Let yourself be human in the face of difficulty. And then, when the feeling has moved through enough that you can function, turn your attention to what needs to happen next. Not what needs to be fixed inside you, but what needs to be done in the world. That's the whole approach. Feel what you feel. Do what needs to be done. Don't make a project out of your inner life. It sounds too simple, I know. We've been trained to believe that emotional complexity requires complex solutions, that psychological difficulty requires psychological intervention, that when we're struggling, the answer is always more work on ourselves. But maybe the simplest approach is also the truest one. Feel it. Let it pass. Move on. Don't turn everything into an identity crisis. Don't make every mood a diagnosis. Don't treat every difficulty as evidence of damage. You're human. Humans have hard times. That's not a bug. It's the design. And when you stop treating your humanity as a problem, something beautiful becomes available. Compassion. For yourself, yes, but also for everyone else who's struggling with the same impossible task of being a person in a confusing world. We're all in this together. Every single human being is navigating difficulty without a manual. Every single one of us feels inadequate sometimes. Every single one of us wonders if something is fundamentally wrong with us. What if we just admitted that? What if we stopped pretending we have it figured out? What if we let ourselves be confused, struggling, imperfect, and still fundamentally okay? The isolation of the self-improvement journey is one of its cruelest aspects. You're alone with your flaws, working on them in private, hoping to emerge someday as someone worthy of connection. But connection doesn't require worthiness. It requires showing up, as you are. Flaws visible. When you stop trying to fix yourself, you can finally be with others, not performing a better version, not hiding what you haven't fixed yet. Just there, human with humans, imperfect among the imperfect. That's where life actually happens. Not in the private project of self-improvement, not in the endless analysis of your psyche, but in the messy, imperfect, beautiful business of being here together. You've been alone with yourself long enough. It's time to come out. This is not an ending. There is no ending to what you are. This is a beginning, or perhaps a returning, to what was always true. You will leave this audiobook and return to your life. The same life you had before, with the same challenges and relationships and circumstances. Nothing external will have changed, but something might be different in how you meet it. A little less judgment, a little more presence, a little more willingness to be who you are without apology. And that little bit of difference, that small shift in orientation, can change everything. Not because you become a different person, but because you stop fighting the person you are. Not because your problems disappear, but because you stop treating yourself as the problem. Life after the self-improvement project isn't empty. It's full of what was waiting while you were busy fixing. The relationships you were postponing until you were good enough. The work you were delaying until you were ready. The joy you were deferring until you deserved it. All of that is available now. Not because you've finally crossed some threshold of worthiness, but because the threshold was imaginary. You were always worthy. You were always ready. You just didn't know it. Now you know. What will you do with that knowledge? I don't know. And I'm not going to tell you, because the whole point of everything we've explored is that you don't need someone else to tell you how to live. You don't need another expert with another program. You don't need more guidance on how to become who you should be. You just need to be who you are. And let that be enough, because it is. It always was. You were never broken. You were just distracted. And now you're here. Fully. Finally. Welcome back.